So, starting out with the film and discussing the film, I wanted to point out the five main points that I found significant. The first one being the collapse of the Incan Empire and how Leguizamo describes it, um, how essentially germs had wiped out the Aztec and then part of the Incan, and then ultimately to completely obliterate the population. Um, Pizarro ended up gathering a bunch of the Incas who hated the Chunka tribe, and ended up essentially killing them because they wouldn't convert. I thought that was pretty significant, as that was kind of like marking the end of the Incan Empire. I mean, there were still some people there, of course, and part of different tribes, but ultimately, that was when Catholicism won, right? So the second significant point that I found was when Leguizamo described how art was different than their art and how they kind of labeled their art, but ultimately describing how a lot of art was made in gold and how um, the Spanish conquistadors came and stole all of that gold to turn it into coins. I think it was 500,000 tons of gold, um, which essentially funded a bunch of the empires that were in Europe. So that was the second point. So the third piece that I felt was significant was when he was talking about his son and about how he looked into his textbook and there was no um, indigenous heroes. Um, I found that growing up, there wasn't any heroes, indigenous heroes in my textbooks either. There wasn't any type of like Latin American history either in any of my courses. It was never even offered in my high school or taught to us in middle school. A lot of it was about the slave trade and about the Trail of Tears, but never really discussing the history of indigenous people, just what happened to them. Never about anybody important or anything significant coming from indigenous people. So I thought that was pretty significant. And so, significant point number four is just it's throughout the whole film, but the amount of people that were killed. I believe he said something about around 70 million people, going back down to a couple of or a few million people were essentially exterminated throughout the expansion. But aside from this, also the amount of things that were stolen from us, not just the gold and the art, but our land, and how we have to deal with the consequences of the Europeans essentially claiming what was ours and us having to deal with it, especially now with the whole issue along the border, and how our border moved, and all those deals that went on that people were making with our land when it wasn't even theirs. So that's significant point number four that I found throughout the film. So the last significant point was when he started bringing out the stats towards the end of the movie or the film. I knew that our ethnic group was subjected to a bunch of hate, but I didn't realize it was to the point that he was making when he would say that our ethnic group has the highest dropout rate, is the most bullied, has the largest amount of people in prison, and is subject to the most hate crimes. I didn't think it was that bad, but when he points it out, it kind of makes no sense. And it's kind of weird also seeing these statistics because a lot of times nobody really talks about it, at least not in my family. I don't really hear it much. I mean, I hear it on campus, but I don't really hear it within my family. I come from a large family, but it's never really discussed. We don't really talk about it, but this kind of sheds some light on that. Now, moving on to comparisons, the first comparison that I noticed was when in the book and in the movie he was discussing how they stole essentially the Iroquois tribe's constitution. That was one that I quickly noticed. When I first saw the film, I didn't read the book before I saw the film. I thought that was kind of crazy. I didn't really believe it, but the book definitely verified that. So that was the first comparison. Another comparison was him when he talked about the church and the different kings that came to conquer from Spain, and the when they started expanding and they were trying to convert all these indigenous people to Christianity and Catholicism, that was definitely discussed in Leguizamo's film in detail. King Philip and a couple of different other conquerors. So that was one other comparison. The last comparison that I made was the germ warfare. In the book, he discusses how smallpox had essentially wiped out a huge population of indigenous people. Leguizamo's film also discussed that, and he talked about different types of diseases that came over. So that was the last comparison that I saw. There's a couple other ones, but those were the main three that I noticed between the film and the book. Ultimately, I thought the film was pretty good. There were some drawbacks, at least to me. I didn't really like the fact that, at least how vulgar he was within the film. I didn't really like that. I kind of drew back from it because he would come up with all these statistics and all these facts and these stories, and although it is him and it's pretty raw, it's not something that I found appealing. I kind of lost interest when he would do things like that. It would definitely, made him lose a lot of credibility in my eyes. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of it, but regardless, in the end, he got his point across to me. I think it could have been done better, without being vulgar, and it would have made a lot more sense. But it's just the way that he is, and that can't really change. You either like it or you don't. But yeah, ultimately, he had a great story, and it was a good film.